The morning began like any other, calm and predictable. I stood by the kitchen counter, half listening to the rhythmic drumming of raindrops against the window as I prepared my second cup of coffee. The kids were upstairs, arguing over something trivial, probably who got to play with the cool controller for the Xbox. I smiled at the sound, appreciating the familiar chaos. Karen, my wife of 11 years, breezed into the room, wrapped in her usual morning routine. She kissed me on the cheek, her lips cool against my skin. "Don't forget, I've got the reunion tonight," she said casually, as if it hadn't been a topic of conversation for weeks. I glanced at her outfit, simple jeans and a sweater. "You're not going like that, are you?" I teased. She laughed, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Of course not. I'll change after work." That was Karen. Always organized, always on top of things. She grabbed her travel mug and headed for the door. "See you tonight," she called out, her voice echoing through the hallway. And then she was gone. The house fell into its routine hum, the sound of dishes clinking as I loaded the dishwasher, the kids stomping downstairs for breakfast. By the time I dropped them off at school, the rain had stopped, leaving the world slick and shining. It wasn't until the afternoon that something felt off. Karen didn't call during her lunch break. It wasn't unusual for her to get caught up in meetings, but a part of me noticed her absence. Normally, she'd text me a quick, "Hey, busy day, love you," or call to check in on the kids. I told myself not to overthink it. By 5:30, I was home, setting the table for dinner. The kids were engrossed in their homework, their voices muffled from the living room. Karen's reunion started at 7 o'clock, and she should have been home by now. I checked my phone. No texts, no missed calls. I dialed her number, and it rang twice before going to voicemail. "Hey, just checking in. What time will you be home? The kids are asking. Hope your day went well." I tried to sound casual, but there was an edge in my voice, one I hadn't noticed until I hung up. Dinner came and went, the kids chatting about their school day, while I mechanically chewed my food. Karen's absence weighed on me more than I wanted to admit. I tried to brush it off, maybe traffic, maybe an unexpected meeting, but it lingered like an itch I couldn't scratch. At 6:45, the front door opened, and Karen walked in, her heels clicking against the floor. She looked stunning, wearing a red dress that hugged her figure in all the right places. Her hair was freshly styled, her makeup flawless. "Sorry I'm late," she said, flashing me a quick smile. "Got caught up at the office." I stood there, spatula in hand, caught off guard by the transformation. "You look wow," I said, my confusion momentarily replaced by admiration. "Thanks." She leaned in for a kiss, but her lips barely grazed mine. She was already moving past me, grabbing her clutch from the counter. "Don't wait up. These things tend to run late." Before I could respond, she was gone again, leaving only the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air. The hours crept by. I tried to distract myself with a movie, but my eyes kept drifting to the clock. Midnight came and went, and with it, my patience. I texted her, "Hey, just checking in. Let me know when you're heading home." The message was read immediately, but no reply came. The pit in my stomach grew. At 1:30, I heard the crunch of tires on the driveway. The door opened, and Karen stepped inside, her face flushed and eyes sparkling. "That was fun," she said, kicking off her heels. She didn't seem drunk, but there was a looseness to her movements, an uncharacteristic lightness. "How was it?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Amazing," she said, her smile wide. She sank onto the couch, her dress hiking up slightly as she crossed her legs. "Guess who was there?" "Jack." The name caught me off guard. "Jack who?" "Jack Reynolds," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "You remember him, right? My high school boyfriend?" I nodded slowly, the name stirring faint memories. Karen had mentioned him once or twice, always in passing, never with much emotion. "Haven't seen him since graduation. He's doing well." Her voice had a dreamy quality to it, and I felt a pang of something I couldn't quite name. Jealousy? Suspicion? "That's nice," I said carefully. "What did you talk about?" "Oh, just catching up. You know, old times. He's married now, 2 kids. Lives out in Denver." she shrugged, brushing off the topic as if it didn't matter. But the way her eyes lingered, the faint blush on her cheeks, they told a different story. The next morning, the unease lingered. Karen seemed chipper, humming as she made breakfast. I wanted to ask her more about Jack, but the words felt too heavy in my mouth. Instead, I checked her phone when she left the room. It wasn't something I was proud of, but the nagging feeling wouldn't let go. Her messages were clean, too clean. No texts to or from Jack, nothing out of the ordinary. But there was something else, her photos. There were none from the reunion. Karen loved taking pictures, documenting everything from mundane dinners to family outings. For her not to have a single photo from the reunion was strange. I put her phone back, guilt gnawing at me. Maybe I was overreacting, reading too much into nothing. But the knot in my stomach refused to untangle. A week later, it happened again. Karen became more distant, her phone always in her hand. She started dressing up more, even on days she worked from home. And then, one evening, a text lit up her screen while she was in the shower. "I can't stop thinking about you. When can we meet again?" The name was saved as J, but I didn't need a detective to figure it out. My blood turned to ice. Karen's laughter echoed from the bathroom. The sound so innocent, so normal. But normal didn't live here anymore. The first thing that struck me was the perfume. Karen had always worn the same scent, a subtle vanilla musk that lingered softly in her wake. But over the past few days, something was different. When she walked by, I caught a sharper, more floral note. At first, I thought she'd just switched brands, a whim, or perhaps a gift from one of her coworkers. New perfume? I asked one evening as we stood side by side at the sink, washing dishes. She paused, her hands immersed in sudsy water. "Oh, yeah," she said casually. "Picked it up last week. Thought I'd try something new." "Smells nice," I said, my voice as neutral as I could manage. She smiled at me, but there was something about the way her eyes darted away too quickly that stirred a small knot of unease. Later that week, I noticed another change. Her phone was now always on silent. It wasn't unusual for Karen to be glued to her phone, scrolling through Instagram or Pinterest, but she'd never been secretive about it. One evening, as we watched TV, her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She glanced at the screen and turned it face down, a quick, almost unconscious motion. "Work?" I asked. "Yeah," she said without missing a beat, her eyes fixed on the TV. Her answer seemed innocent enough, but a subtle tension hung in the air. The kind that makes you hyper-aware of every small movement, every breath. The next morning, I found something odd in the laundry. As I sorted through the pile, a black lace bra stood out, a brand new piece of lingerie I didn't recognize. It wasn't Karen's usual style. She preferred simpler, more comfortable things. I held it up, examining the delicate fabric. Karen walked in, a mug of coffee in hand. Her eyes landed on the bra, and for a split second, her expression froze. Then she laughed. "Found it," she said, setting her coffee on the counter. "I was wondering where that went." "It's new, isn't it?" I asked, my tone light but my curiosity heavy. She nodded, her smile never faltering. "Yeah, bought it a few weeks ago. Thought I'd surprise you, but I guess you beat me to it." Her explanation made sense, but the knot in my stomach didn't loosen. I tried to rationalize these moments. People change perfumes. Phones go on silent. New lingerie can be a spontaneous purchase. None of it meant anything on its own. But together, they felt like pieces of a puzzle I wasn't meant to solve. That Friday, Karen announced she was meeting her old high school friends for dinner. "Anyone I know?" I asked, casually flipping through a magazine. "Just the girls," she said, her voice light. I nodded, trying to suppress the strange, creeping suspicion that had started to grow inside me. "Have fun." She smiled and leaned in for a quick kiss. "Love you," she said before heading out the door. An hour later, as I stood at the sink rinsing dishes, I noticed her perfume again. The sharp, floral scent lingered, stronger than usual. I glanced out the kitchen window, watching the rain-slicked street, and wondered if I was losing my mind. Karen's purse was sitting on the counter. Normally, I wouldn't have given it a second thought, but tonight, something nagged at me. I stared at it for a long time, the magazine in my hand forgotten. My heart raced as I reached for it. Inside, everything seemed normal. Her wallet, lipstick, receipts from the grocery store. But tucked into a side pocket, I found something that made my blood run cold. A hotel key card. It was plain white with no markings, the kind you'd get at any generic hotel. My mind raced, trying to piece together why Karen would have this. Was it from a previous work trip? A simple mistake, forgotten in the shuffle of her purse? I told myself it didn't mean anything, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that it did. When Karen came home that night, she was in high spirits, laughing as she kicked off her heels and collapsed onto the couch. "How was dinner?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "Great," she said. "It's always nice catching up with the girls." She reached for her phone, her fingers moving quickly as she typed something. I watched her, the knot in my stomach tightening. The key card felt like a burning coal in my pocket, its presence heavy and undeniable. "Anything exciting happen?" I pressed. "Not really," she said, glancing at me with a smile. "Just the usual gossip." I nodded, forcing a smile of my own. But my thoughts were elsewhere, turning over the key card like a stone in my mind. The next morning, I couldn't take it anymore. While Karen was in the shower, I called the hotel chain I suspected the card belonged to. "Hi," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I found a room key, and I'm trying to figure out which location it's from. Can you help me?" The clerk asked for the key card's serial number, and I read it off. "That's from our downtown location," she said after a moment. "Was it recently lost?" I swallowed hard. "Do you have a record of the room number?" She hesitated. "I'm sorry, sir. I can't give out that information." "I understand," I said quickly. "Thanks anyway." As I hung up, my mind reeled. Downtown. That was just 20 minutes from here. The puzzle pieces were starting to fall into place, and the picture they painted was one I didn't want to see. That evening, I confronted Karen. I didn't mention the key card right away. Instead, I started with something small. "How's work been?" I asked casually as we sat on the couch. "Busy," she said, leaning her head back against the cushions. "How's Jack?" I asked, throwing the name out like a grenade. Her head snapped toward me, her eyes wide. "Jack? What do you mean?" "I don't know," I said, shrugging. "You mentioned him at the reunion. Just curious if you've talked since then." She hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line. "No," she said finally. The lie was so obvious it hurt. "Karen," I said softly, reaching into my pocket and pulling out the key card. Her eyes widened as I held it up. "Care to explain this?" Her mouth opened, then closed, her face pale. For the first time in our marriage, I saw panic in her eyes. And in that moment, I knew. I didn't need her to say anything. The truth was written all over her face. The days that followed my discovery of the hotel key card were a blur of confusion and anxiety. Every interaction with Karen felt like a performance. Her smile seemed rehearsed, her laugh hollow. Even the way she held my hand felt different, as though she were trying too hard, or not enough. I wanted to confront her again, to demand answers, but fear held me back. What if I was wrong? What if the key card had an innocent explanation, and my suspicions were nothing more than paranoia? But what if I wasn't? The uncertainty was maddening. That Friday, I met my best friend, Mike, for drinks at a local bar. We hadn't seen much of each other lately, but I needed his advice, even if I couldn't tell him the whole truth. Mike was the kind of guy who could see through any facade. His easygoing demeanor made it hard to keep secrets, but I resolved to tread lightly. "You look like hell," he said as I slid onto the stool beside him. "Thanks," I muttered, signaling the bartender for a beer. Mike studied me for a moment, his grin fading. "All right, spill it. What's going on?" I hesitated, tracing the edge of my coaster with my finger. "It's Karen," I said finally. His eyebrows shot up. "Everything okay?" "Yeah. I think so. She's just been acting a little different lately." "Different how?" "Hard to explain. It's probably nothing." Mike gave me a pointed look. "If it's bothering you this much, it's not nothing." I took a long sip of my beer, trying to organize my thoughts. She's been distant, secretive, even. And I found something, I stopped myself, shaking my head. What did you find? Nothing important, I said quickly. Forget it. Mike leaned back, crossing his arms. Look, man, if you've got doubts, you need to talk to her. Bottling this up will only make it worse. I know, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. That night, Karen was waiting for me when I got home. She was curled up on the couch, a glass of wine in her hand. How was Mike? She asked, her tone light. Good, I said, shrugging out of my jacket. She tilted her head, studying me. You seem quiet. Just tired, I replied, avoiding her gaze. She didn't press further, but the silence that followed was heavy, like an invisible barrier between us. The next morning, I decided to dig deeper. Karen had left early for yoga, a new hobby she'd picked up in recent months. As soon as her car pulled out of the driveway, I went upstairs to our bedroom. I started with her dresser, carefully opening each drawer. Everything seemed normal, clothes neatly folded, her jewelry organized in its usual box. But in the back of her lingerie drawer, I found a small, unfamiliar box. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a delicate gold necklace, the pendant shaped like a heart. It wasn't something I had given her. My mind raced. Was it a gift from someone else? A keepsake she'd bought for herself? The thought that it might be from Jack, or worse, someone else, made my stomach churn. I put the box back where I found it and closed the drawer, my heart pounding. By the time Karen returned, I had managed to calm myself. She walked into the kitchen, her face glowing with post-workout energy. Good class? I asked, forcing a smile. Great, she said, grabbing a water bottle from the fridge. For a moment, I considered asking her about the necklace, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I just nodded, watching as she walked away. That evening, I took the kids to the park while Karen stayed home to catch up on work. As they played, I sat on a bench, staring blankly at the swings. My thoughts were a whirlwind of doubt and fear. I thought about what Mike had said, talk to her. But every time I imagined the conversation, my chest tightened. I didn't want to hear the answers, didn't want to confirm what I already suspected. A voice broke through my reverie. Mind if I sit here? I looked up to see a woman standing in front of me, her smile warm and friendly. Sure, I said, scooting over to make room. She introduced herself as Sarah, her own kids playing nearby. We struck up a casual conversation, and for the first time in days, I felt a flicker of normalcy. Rough day? She asked after a while, her tone kind. Something like that, I admitted. She nodded, her expression thoughtful. Sometimes it helps to talk about it, even if it's just to a stranger. Her words caught me off guard. There was something comforting about her presence, a sense of understanding I hadn't expected. When I got home, Karen was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. How was the park? She asked, glancing over her shoulder. Good, I said, setting my keys on the counter. For a moment, I considered telling her about Sarah, about how her words had made me realize I needed to confront my fears. But something held me back. Instead, I said, do you ever feel like we've lost something? Karen paused, her knife hovering over the cutting board. What do you mean? I don't know, I said, shrugging. I just feel like we've been a little off lately. She turned to face me, her brow furrowed. Off how? Like we're not as connected as we used to be. Karen's expression softened, and she stepped closer, resting a hand on my arm. I know I've been busy lately, but that doesn't mean I love you any less. Her words were sincere, but they didn't ease the ache in my chest. That night, as Karen slept beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The hotel key card, the necklace, her distant behavior. It all swirled in my mind, an unrelenting storm. And yet, there was a small part of me that still wanted to believe her, to trust the woman I'd built my life with. But as I lay there, listening to the sound of her breathing, I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't keep ignoring the signs. Whatever the truth was, I had to find it, even if it broke me. The necklace had become my obsession. I couldn't shake the image of that delicate gold heart resting in Karen's lingerie drawer. Every time she kissed me, every time she laughed, I wondered if it was meant for someone else, or worse, from someone else. I couldn't let it go any longer. That evening, while Karen was putting the kids to bed, I made a decision. I would find out what she was hiding, no matter the cost. The next morning, as Karen prepared for her yoga class, I decided to test the waters. "Hey," I said casually, sipping my coffee. "I was thinking maybe we could go out for dinner tonight. Just the two of us. It's been a while." Her eyes lit up, and for a moment, the warmth in her smile made me second-guess my suspicions. "I'd love that," she said. As she left, I felt a pang of guilt. What if I was wrong? What if she really was just busy, distracted by the everyday chaos of life? But the doubt still lingered. That afternoon, while Karen was out, I went back to her lingerie drawer. The necklace was still there, untouched. I picked it up, examining the intricate design. On the back of the pendant, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. An engraving. "Forever, J." My breath caught in my throat. J. Jack. It had to be him. By the time Karen returned, I had concocted a plan. Dinner tonight would be the perfect opportunity to confront her. Public enough to keep things civil, private enough to demand the truth. She was in high spirits as we sat at our favorite restaurant, her smile radiant as we clinked glasses of wine. "I miss this," she said, reaching for my hand. "Me too," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. The conversation was light at first, touching on the kids, work, and upcoming plans. But as the meal progressed, I couldn't hold back any longer. "Karen," I began, setting my fork down, "there's something I need to ask you." Her smile faltered slightly. "What is it?" I hesitated, searching her face for any hint of guilt. "The necklace in your drawer. The one with the heart pendant. Who's it from?" Her expression froze, a flicker of something unreadable crossing her face. "It's from you," she said quickly. The lie hit me like a slap. "Karen, I've never seen that necklace before in my life." Her eyes darted around the room, as if searching for an escape. It was a gift to myself," she said finally. "I saw it in a shop and thought it was pretty. That's all." "And the engraving? Forever, J? What does that mean?" She looked stunned, like a deer caught in headlights. It doesn't mean anything. It's just part of the design." The explanation was weak, but her voice carried a note of desperation that gave me pause. For a moment, I wanted to believe her. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe I was overreacting. The next day, I decided to test her story. While Karen was at work, I went back to the shop downtown where I suspected the necklace had come from. I showed the clerk a picture I'd taken of the pendant. "Do you remember selling this?" I asked. She nodded immediately. "Oh yes, that's one of our custom designs. We only made a few of those." "Do you remember who bought it?" The clerk frowned, thinking. "I'd have to check our records. Hold on." As she disappeared into the back room, my stomach churned with anticipation. When she returned, she was holding a receipt. "Here it is. It was purchased about 3 weeks ago." I glanced at the name on the receipt. Karen's name wasn't there. The receipt was in Jack's name. The air seemed to leave the room. My suspicions had been confirmed, but instead of clarity, I felt a deeper sense of confusion. Why would Jack buy Karen a necklace? Why would she hide it? That evening, I confronted Karen again. "I went to the store today," I said as we sat in the living room. She froze, her hands gripping her wine glass tightly. "What store?" "The one where you got the necklace. The one Jack bought for you." Her face drained of color, and for a moment, she looked like she might faint. You went through my things?" "Don't turn this on me," I snapped. "I know the truth, Karen. Just tell me why." Tears welled in her eyes, and she set the glass down with trembling hands. "It's not what you think," she whispered. "Then what is it?" I demanded. She hesitated, her gaze fixed on the floor. "Jack, he reached out to me after the reunion. He said he wanted to make amends, to apologize for how things ended between us." "And the necklace?" "He said it was a gesture of friendship," she said, her voice barely audible. "I didn't want to accept it, but he insisted." Her explanation sounded plausible, but something about it felt incomplete. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "I didn't want to upset you," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I thought it would be easier to just let it go." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I considered letting it go. Maybe she was telling the truth. But then my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and felt my blood turn to ice. It was a text from an unknown number. "I miss you. Can we talk? Jay." The room seemed to tilt as I stared at the message. Karen saw the look on my face and leaned forward. "What's wrong?" I handed her the phone, my hands shaking. Her reaction was immediate, her face crumpling in horror, her voice trembling. I can explain," she stammered, but I didn't want to hear it. In that moment, everything I thought I knew about my marriage came crashing down, and I realized I was no closer to the truth than when I'd started. The room felt like it had shrunk, the air so thick with tension I could barely breathe. Karen stared at the text on my phone, her hands trembling, her lips parted to speak, but no words came. For a long moment, we were locked in silence, two actors waiting for a cue that would never come. "Talk," I said finally, my voice low and cold. Karen looked at me, her tear-streaked face a portrait of anguish. "It's not what it looks like," she whispered. "Don't," I snapped, the anger rising in my chest. "Don't insult me with cliches. Just tell me the truth. The whole truth." Her shoulders slumped, and she sank onto the couch, cradling her head in her hands. "I didn't want to hurt you," she said, her voice muffled. "I thought I could handle it, that it wouldn't go this far." My stomach churned. "Handle what?" "Jack," she said, barely audible. He reached out after the reunion, and at first, it was innocent. Just catching up, talking about old times. But then, her voice trailed off, and I clenched my fists. "But then what?" Karen's eyes met mine, and the guilt in them was unbearable. "He told me he still had feelings for me, that he never stopped loving me." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "And what about you?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. "I told him I loved you," she said quickly, "that I was happy with our life, with our family. But he wouldn't let it go. He said he just wanted to be friends, to stay in touch." "Friends," I repeated, the word bitter on my tongue. She nodded, her face crumpling. "I thought I could manage it, that it would fade over time. But he kept pushing, sending me gifts, texting me late at night. And I was too weak to stop it." My chest tightened. "And the necklace? The hotel key card? Explain those." Karen's breath hitched, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "The necklace was his way of trying to win me back. I didn't want it, but I didn't know how to give it back without causing a scene." "And the key card?" She hesitated, and the silence was damning. "Karen," I said, my voice dangerously low. Her head snapped up, her expression desperate. "I met him for coffee," she admitted. "Just once, at a hotel lobby. I didn't go to his room, I swear. I wanted to tell him to stop, to leave me alone." "That's why you didn't mention it to me," I said bitterly. "Because you knew how it would look." Karen nodded, her tears flowing freely now. "I know I messed up. I should have told you everything from the beginning, but I was scared. Scared of losing you." The weight of her words settled over me like a lead blanket. Part of me wanted to believe her, to accept her version of events and move on. But the other part, the part still reeling from the betrayal, refused to let go. That night, I couldn't sleep. Karen had retreated to the guest room, giving me space, but her presence lingered like a shadow in the corners of my mind. I replayed her words over and over, dissecting every detail, every inflection. Was she telling the truth? Or was this just another carefully constructed lie to protect herself? The text from Jack still burned in my mind. "I miss you. Can we talk? Jay." I stared at it again, my thumb hovering over the reply button. Finally, I made a decision. The next day, I drove to the address listed on Jack's receipt from the jewelry store. It was a modest house on a quiet street, the kind of place you'd never think twice about. I didn't have a plan, just a desperate need for answers. When Jack opened the door, his surprise was evident. "Mark," he said, his voice tinged with both guilt and caution. "We need to talk," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. He stepped aside, and I walked into his living room, the walls adorned with family photos. It made my stomach churn to think about what kind of man could betray his own family so easily. I know about the texts, I began, my voice cold. The necklace, the key card. I know everything. Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, I didn't mean for things to get complicated. I couldn't let go of the past. The past? I spat. You're living in a fantasy, Jack. Karen is my wife. We have a life together, a family. I know, he said quickly, and I respect that. I do. But you don't understand. She and I, we had something special. Something I've never been able to find again. I clenched my fists, my body trembling with anger. You don't get to rewrite history. Karen chose me. She built a life with me. Jack hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. I never wanted to hurt her, or you, but I needed closure. Closure? I said, laughing bitterly. Is that what you call harassing my wife with gifts and texts? Inviting her to a hotel? It wasn't like that, he said defensively. We met in the lobby. We talked. That's all. His words mirrored Karen's, but they did little to soothe the storm raging inside me. Stay away from her, I said finally, my voice hard. No more texts, no more gifts. If I hear from you again, I'll make sure your wife knows exactly what kind of man you are. Jack's face paled, but he nodded. You have my word. When I got home, Karen was waiting for me in the kitchen. Where were you? She asked, her voice tentative. Talking to Jack, I said bluntly. Her eyes widened, and she took a step back. What did he say? He confirmed your story, I said, my voice flat. Relief washed over her face, but I held up a hand. Don't mistake this for forgiveness, I added. You should have told me the truth from the start. I know, she whispered, tears pooling in her eyes. And I'm so sorry. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. In the days that followed, I wrestled with my emotions. Anger, betrayal, sadness. They swirled inside me, refusing to settle. Karen gave me space, respecting my need to process everything. But the damage had been done. One evening, as we sat together in silence, I finally spoke. I don't know if I can trust you again. Karen looked at me, her eyes filled with regret. I understand, she said softly, but I'm willing to try if you are. The decision wasn't easy. Rebuilding trust would take time, and there were no guarantees. But as I looked at the woman I had loved for so many years, I realized that love wasn't about guarantees. It was about choice. And in that moment, I chose to stay. But I also chose to protect myself. The next day, I called a lawyer to draft a post-nuptial agreement, one that ensured I'd be protected if Karen ever strayed again. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. And as I signed the papers, I realized something. Love could survive betrayal, but it would never be the same. And maybe that was the price of holding on.